we continue to need to name something important, that as we approach this story, we do so carefully in our modern context. For we have heard in the commentaries that have been written and shared that many who are born blind and who live with a disability, again, we use that word disability to suit those of us who are differently abled, rightly take issue with the idea that you must be able to see in order to be made whole. And as a church, we confess our ableism, the stigmatizing of disability, the assumption that normal bodies or senses are better or more blessed. We have this reality that exists in our society, and sometimes it makes its way embedded into our theologies. So hear this clearly this morning. As we've heard it already said, it's worth repeating that blindness is not a moral failing. Having physical sight does not make a person more beloved by God. And if you live differently abled, you are fully, beautifully whole in the image of God as you are. If there is no cure, God is not absent. If your body or senses change over time, God has not withdrawn blessing from you. Many of us in this congregation know the very real and embodied experience of diminishing eyesight. Just this past week, several among us underwent cataract surgery. Others are living with macular degeneration, glaucoma, and other changes in vision. Some are grieving things that they can no longer see with clarity. Others are grateful for treatments that restore some measure of sight, or eye glasses that bring a different level of vision. This story can touch hope and fear, gratitude and grief, often in our very own bodies and in our frailty. Sometimes this happens to us all at once. So, as is good of us, friends, we hold all of that complexity as we proceed, finding, as it is so often true with Jesus, that a healing or a parable serves as an entryway for a large teachable truth. As Joyce has shared with us throughout John, the Pharisees continue to react and reveal a kind of spiritual blindness, an unwillingness to see the one who is healed, and unwillingness to see who the healed man names, the prophet that is Jesus before them, the person with particular prophetic sight. Instead of rejoicing, they debate, and instead of celebrating the healing, they cast blame. This is not ancient history. Many of us worry about a society that can be and chooses willful blindness to the consequences of our actions, blindness to the needs of our neighbors, and blind to the beauty and necessity of diverse perspectives. We ache when evidence sits right in front of us and still cannot be admitted, when the testimony of those who suffer is silenced. And a particular pang of mine as a woman living in this country, when we wait on a dead man's emails to confirm what dozens of women have seen and experienced firsthand of abuse. We see today as people are punished for telling the truth. And so we long for public witnesses like Jesus, professing belovedness of all people, a network of mutuality as it echoes from MLK that holds us accountable for one another, and the responsibility that we all have in contributing to peace across all of creation. That's why I was drawn to Stephen Charleston, and he's the anchoring person in the midst of our Lenten journey together, whether you choose to do the guide for Lent on your own or with a group. He's calling us to acknowledge our agency at this current time in our reality to turn the wheel of history together. As someone who holds different perspectives, as a Choctaw elder who is also an Episcopal priest and has traveled the entirety of the globe speaking to people from different spiritual traditions, he brings to us clarity for this moment, that we might listen both to the story of Jesus and trust in the sight that we have as God's beings. Many of you are aware that there were many Buddhist monks traveling over the last couple of months, right? 10 days ago, a group of Theravada Buddhist monks completed their 2,300-mile journey. Did you know it happened over 108 days? There was a Peace in Motion pilgrimage, and you likely saw it in little snatches on the internet or on the news. Did anyone make it down to DC in order to see them? All right, wonderful. I'm so glad that you're here, Cam. A few of us made it to the surprise visit in Annapolis. I'd wanted to go down to DC and I couldn't make it. And it so happened that there was supposed to be an interfaith day of immigrant action in Annapolis on the 12th. And Vanessa and several others, we were going to go down. And we heard last moment that it was being postponed because the monks were coming to Maryland. They'd originally wanted to come, and they had made their stop to end in D.C., but there were those in Maryland who prevailed upon them, and so they took a bus last minute from D.C. all the way to Navy Stadium so that they could make one last trek in our fair state. They would end up in the state capitol in front of our legislators, right? And so it felt perfect and serendipitous, right? Because immigrant tasks and legislation need to be happening every day. But here was a moment when we were all caused to pause and allow those harbingers of peace to enter into the halls of power, just as they had been in our country's capital, proclaiming their simple messages of meditation and healing. So they came down the road to us. And the serendipitous nature of the schedule meant that I was already planning on a Annapolis version and journey. And so Vanessa and I went over to that space. The mood of the crowd was electric, but there was this sense of unease because we didn't know exactly what was coming in what direction and exact spot that the monks would occupy. And so we got, and you just kind of find a spot and you anchor there a little bit. We were amongst those who were craning their necks and balancing phones and cameras and laughing awkwardly as you do when you're trying to be both firm and accommodating at once about where you wish to stand. And I noticed that there were some police corralling people around the edges. And it was in these moments, as we had time to wait, that I was wondering if this is what it felt like to welcome Jesus to town. The pushing forward for a glimpse of what was coming, the expectation that there was some healing energy that accompanied them, and the sense of which we each had to see for ourselves exactly what was going to be in front of us. There was, again, this mixture of excitement and unease all at the same time. We tend to hold that in crowds these days, don't we? Perhaps thinking about a bang or listening for an unruly disruption, how it is that we might exit a space if needed. That's part of being human these days. But there was also just this overwhelming sense of wanting to be present, determined as these 12,000 people were around us, trying to get a glimpse. At one point, someone bumped Vanessa, and they ended up hugging. And another someone elbowed past, insistent that they needed a more prime space. That impatience was met with civility. And no doubt many of us listen in case, again, a disruption might be about. At one point later on, there were a lot of dogs howling. I did wonder about all the immigrants of our region, especially those who would not dare to be out on such a day as this, fearing interrogation or worse. But here we all were. And it happened that Vanessa and I ended up in an ideal spot for spotting the bright orange that we could start to see at a distance. I'm laughing because as I look out, I see John Hamilton in the back row wearing his bright orange shirt. It was about at that time in my distance from him that we started to see those monks coming. And that mood again began to shift. And they came walking. Vanessa's got several little slides here to show us. You could see them with the kindness in their eyes and the flower as they are holding them, and the sense of anticipation that is around. Can you see how close we got to be as they walked by? Again, how long their journey. And here in the next slide, we don't want to miss, that many of them were going barefoot. I think it's important to say on the cold February bricks. Can you see? That was the main speaker who I'll mention, the venerable leader. And in the slide previously, you saw that they were very adamant that their flowers go to the most vulnerable in their midst, the children. And so there was this child, a baby, truly, as the mom kneeled down, and they kept on handing flowers to her, and she burst out into tears. So important was as the baby began then to grasp the flower in its hand. As we see these, I am reacquainted with that feeling. Perhaps you know it too. How hungry we all are for signs of gentleness and compassion. The monks then made their way to the center of the podium, and everyone was trying and definitely craning in to hear what it was they had to say when the mic wasn't working all that well. The initiator of the walk and leader of that journey, the Venerable Panakara, spoke, and the message was simple. One practice that was offered throughout the walk was this: please don't touch your phone when you wake up in the morning. And there was that same knowing chuckle, right? He reminded us that the first moments of the day can train the eyes and the soul, and not to take in trash, as he called it. Begin with presence. Begin by attending to the life within you and around you before the world's noise decides what you will see. He spoke of peace not as something that arrives from outside, but as something already present within us. He was determined that we know that they weren't bringing peace. They were just awakening us to the peace that is already here. We saw them living that humbly before us through their worn feet from walking, from the flowers meant for the children, for the pauses that spoke volumes. They embodied a way of seeing that was slow, attentive, mindful, and human. And I absorbed that and tried to live it in those next days to come, and I'm still trying. It was some day later that I came across the account of someone also nearby who'd been in D.C. to see the monks. He was on assignment. Robert Hill, a senior broadcast journalism major from Howard University, witnessed those monks in D.C., and he stood in a majority white crowd in the middle of the day, as was in Annapolis, a majority white crowd. He had had this assignment to go see what this means, and he found that it wasn't simple at all. He saw what many saw: disciplined, steady, luminous spiritual leaders walking. But he also saw what no doubt others had taken for granted. He registered the police presence everywhere. And in his essay, he names the history that lives in his black body, the constant, quiet calculation. Am I safe here? He names what so many black neighbors know, in spaces not built with you in mind. You're always reading the room, always scanning, always aware of who is comfortable, who is watching, who has the privilege of taking this moment for granted. Robert Hill holds two truths at once: that some people are seen as peaceful simply by standing still, while others must prove their humanity even in their silence. And yet, for him, in that crowded, complicated moment, he makes a courageous choice. He tells us that he lets the monk's presence recenter him, and he lets their rhythm draw his attention. He discovers that resistance is not only about volume, but about steadiness, about staying in rhythm when the world tries to knock you off beat. And he concluded that presence can be power. Two people can stand in similar places and look at similar scenes unfolding and see very differently, just as happens in our story today. Not because one is wrong and one is right, but because our bodies carry stories. And if our bodies have only carried stories of trauma, or that rely on things like supremacy, then perhaps we need new narratives. Our histories and experiences shape our vision as a country. If we don't share a common memory, as we hear so many speak of, Mark Charles and others from Native perspectives, if we don't share that common memory, as Robert Hill emphasized in his essay, then how can we be expected to interpret what we see in the same way? If we look around and see efforts to erase history, erase important history from which lessons must be derived, how can we expect peace to come walking in? Friends, I'm still sitting with the monks, imagining that they're tending to their feet back in Fort Worth, Texas. But I'm imagining our Lenten journey as a walk as well. This is our first Sunday of Lent in this 40-day forage that we have all the way to Easter. And somehow, if we're going to make it to resurrection, we have to continue to grapple with some of the reality that we face right now. It's a season of clearing our sight, a season of noticing where we have grown spiritually nearsighted, or distracted, or numb, or lost on our phones. We are not asked to sprint. We are asked just to move steadily, mindfully, like the monks, and like the man who washed his face and opened his eyes to see for the very first time. Lent invites us to see truthfully, even when it is painful to admit it to ourselves, even as it asks something bold of us and refusing to look away and claiming our work as we're called to it now. And at the center of this practice is Jesus, the one who sees us before we see him, and who looks upon us, even in our own blindnesses, with tender mercy. As the healed man said, he put mud on my eyes, then I washed, now I see. Friends, we don't all receive the same healing, and we don't receive it in the same way. But we are invited to this posture of humility, and to keep washing as we are instructed, and to keep seeing what it is that is unfolding before us. I'm going to end with a prayer that's inviting us in the midst of our waking up to keep our phone at a distance, right? When you wake up this week, can you not reach for the phone immediately and maybe even an hour later or such? Instead, perhaps place a hand over your heart and take small, slow breaths. And sometime this week, remembering the importance of perspectives, perhaps find the opportunity to ask one person whose experience is different from your own, what do you see that I might be missing? And then listen. Let's have a prayer and then a moment of silence, and we'll have a few moments for community response this morning. Here we are, O God, in our bodies, having heard the complicated scripture before us and listening for the steady presence that you bring and for the invitation for forward motion. In these moments, as we hear from one another, help us to keep in mind that we each of us see differently and may even have received a different message today. Help us to be in the nearness of your presence, to believe in the peace that is abounding, and to believe that peace begins with me. Amen.